Does it feel like since COVID that if you work out in the field, whether you're in the medical profession, whether you're a social worker, whether you're a delivery person, people really are short-tempered with you, that they're threatening violence more frequently, that you're having to deal with people who are literally a threat to your safety? Hopefully your employers, or if you're self-employed, you've done some research and done some work on how to keep yourself safe so that you can earn your living and help provide services to other people. But that's not always the case. So I wanted to share some tips with you, and kind of just in a more informal discussion way, based upon my experiences of what you can do to keep yourself safe when you have to work with a population that puts you at risk, or in locations that put your safety at risk. Hi, I'm Mike Corwin. I spent over 30 years working as a field investigator for attorneys preparing cases in some of our country's most dangerous areas. I worked for many years in the Los Angeles County area, including in South Central at the time of the Rodney King riots, and in New Mexico, which is sadly became a lot like the show Breaking Bad in terms of what you dealt with when you were out and about. I now work with companies and individuals to help coach them in workplace violence prevention. Now, we often think about workplace violence prevention as somebody at the workplace, maybe a former employee or current disgruntled worker, as they'd like to call them, going quote unquote postal. But that's not what I'm talking about here so much. I'm talking about whether your work takes you to deal with people who maybe have mental health risks, maybe are threatening physically because of the circumstances they're in, but also if you have to deal with the general public. I mean, we're hearing stories of kids accidentally turning up in the wrong driveway and getting shot, of families getting shot because they go and retrieve a ball from a neighbor's yard. People are really short. Now, I spent 30 years walking up to total strangers' homes in these pretty high-risk neighborhoods, knocking on the door unannounced and trying to get them to be willing to let me into their home so I could interview them, not knowing who's in the home, what these people's background is like. And I did this for 30 years, literally thousands and thousands of times. Now, if you liked what you had in this video, I'm going to encourage you to go ahead and download my free situational awareness guide. It takes you through some different scenarios and how to use that situational awareness to keep yourself safe. You can find a link to it in the description below. So here's kind of what I learned. The single most important thing when your job puts you at risk, and let's say you're a new in the real estate business and you're doing open homes, if you work in a hospital where it's an emergency room setting, if you're a utility reader, any of these different things can put you into a greater risk. And what I tend to think about is the most important thing to do is that awareness of your surroundings and the people in it. Now, the reason why this is so important in terms of your safety is because this is what allows you to actually avoid a dangerous situation or a physically threatening situation. What we want to talk about is expanding your awareness of what is going on around you. Now, I know everybody thinks, hey, I grew up in a big city, I have great situational awareness, which is that formal term. But let's be honest, most of us, when we're out working, we're focusing on what we have to do. We're thinking about the tasks at hand. We're thinking about maybe the things that we're going to say if we approach someone and we have to do some work. Maybe we're a home health aide and we're getting ready to go into somebody's home to work, and look, people can have aggression even in those kinds of situations, and it can be people who aren't even normally aggressive. You have to kind of be aware of that. And what I like to counsel you about is thinking about looking at your surroundings, getting used to understanding and reading those surroundings, and getting ready to respond when something unfolds in those surroundings. Now, I'll give you a really good example. And when I was a young investigator and I had to write a lot of reports, and I realized I was really crappy at writing reports. So I took a night writing class, and this was at Santa Monica High School out in California. And at that time, Santa Monica had a huge street population, including many people who had been in and out of custody and people who had mental health challenges. And so one night, it was during the break, and I'm really a morning person, so I really have to go and get coffee in order to stay awake just for this night class. So I walked across the street, I think it was Pico Boulevard, and I was heading to Lincoln. This is a major intersection. Pico's a lot of lanes of traffic at that point and busy traffic. So I cross the street and I start walking up to a donut place that sold coffee up at the corner, when all of a sudden I see light reflecting. Now keep in mind, this is dark, so this light was reflecting off of a street light, but it's pretty unusual because that light was reflecting from the hand of a person who was leaning up against a fence just a little bit away from the sidewalk. This is not good because that reflecting light shouldn't be reflecting. But I had already crossed the street and I couldn't really double back, and this person started to move off of the sidewalk or to the sidewalk off of the fence, and I'm approaching this guy. And all of a sudden I realized I need to think about something because I think this guy's got a weapon. And sure enough, by the way, that is what he had. He had a sharpened metal rod, and his intent was to rob me. And as I'm approaching him, I realized he'd need to get me to stop. Right now, if he tried to block my path, I could walk past him. That's not a big deal. But he really needed to get me to stop in order to rob me. So as I'm walking forward, I get there and I said to myself, I need to just keep moving. That's my game plan. Keep moving. So as I approached him, he said, "Hey, do you know what time it is?" And that's actually a pretty good ploy because most people will stop, look at their watch, and go for it from there. I didn't want to stop, so I also didn't want to be rude or set him off in case he had some mental health challenges. So I basically just went ahead and looked down at my watch, told him what time it was, but kept walking. And I walked right past him, and when I got about 20 feet down the sidewalk from him, I looked back, and I could tell this guy from his body language was pretty dumbfounded because this ploy had clearly worked before. It was my awareness of the surrounding and the people in it, and recognizing that that flash of light indicated there was a potential problem. So we really need, first and foremost, to focus on our awareness. And that includes if you go inside someone's home, maybe you're a social worker, maybe you're a home health care person, and you have to work in the home, you need to look around the home for, one, potential risks to you, and two, potential safe places you can go to. I remember when I was an investigator, this was a pretty high-level case. It involved pretty horrific crimes. And back then I was actually doing criminal defense work, and I had to go and interview a famous bounty hunter who literally had weapons in every single room in his house, plus a caregiver / security guy with him because this guy had arrested and brought in so many people, or not arrested, but brought in so many people who had skipped bail, that he constantly faced life-threatening situations. Now, for me, he wasn't, at risk from me, and he knew that. But literally, I walked into this tense situation because anytime a stranger came into his home, he had to be on guard that this person could snap at him, and I had to be prepared that he could snap. What you want to do is be aware of places that you can go to that you can be safe. Now, you might not be able to get to the front door, but we're going to talk about that in a moment. Maybe it's just going into another room. Maybe it's locking yourself in the bathroom. Maybe it's just going on the other side of a table. And by the way, the most important thing, if you have to go into someone's home or you have to go into someone's business and they're angry, they're agitated, is not to let them be between you and the place that you have to go to get out of there. And even if this was your own office and you were having an agitated or angry person in your own office, you never want them between you and the way out of your space. So I want you to think and focus on places you can go, places that you can be while you interact with these people, so that you are not blocked from any exit points. And if you think about it, this awareness is really about keeping safe by being able to get away from and out of. So it's really about your exit point. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about is what we call de-escalation. Now, a lot of people think they know how to de-escalate, but here's the thing. De-escalation is not verbal judo. What you really want to talk about is calming them through listening, not you talking, not you verbally sparring with these people, because when you verbally spar, you ramp it up. Bottom line, right? You just flat out ramp it up. We don't want to ramp it up. We want to calm it down. We want to prevent it from going into an attack. So what you want to do are things, what I call reflective listening, which is kind of paraphrasing back. So if somebody comes on to you really aggressively and really strongly, instead of saying F you or back off, you say something like, look, hey, I hear what you're saying. Let me make sure I understand what you're saying. Now there's two things happening. When you say, let me understand what you're saying, and let me make sure I understand what you're saying, what you're showing them is you actually are listening to them. And a lot of people that get agitated, they really just want to be heard, right? So you're showing that. The next thing that you're doing is you're slowing down your own response by saying, hey, let me make sure I understand what you're saying. You're not responding with that F you or back off or something aggressive. You're actually calming yourself down. You're calming the situation down by not overreacting. And then finally, what you're really doing is you're buying some time to keep trying to calm the situation down. Now, there may be times that you can't de-escalate, and in those situations, you have to prepare for an attack, because an attack is going to come in a split second, right? So mentally, you have to prepare for that. But you always want to look for that ability to calm the situation. So if you're in, if you're a social worker and you're making a home visit, and this person starts getting really aggressive with you, don't go toe-to-toe with them. Calm it down. Say, hey, hold on, I hear what you're saying. Let me make sure I understand it. Now that's a really powerful thing to say to him is, I hear what you're saying. Let me make sure I understand what you're saying, and let's see if we can figure something out. The other thing, by the way, when you do that is you take this person out of their mindset, right? They kind of are getting aggressive. They're building up. They're maybe forming a plan. By saying, let me make sure I understand you. Now they have to listen back to what you're saying, and that takes them out of their mind. Now, earlier I mentioned you might not be able to de-escalate a situation, and in that case, when you're preparing for an attack, the first and foremost thing we need to do is to change the dynamic of that attack. Here's what I mean by that. An attacker knows exactly what he wants to do, and he launches basically an attack is a surprise attack. You know, if somebody dances around and they dance around, they're actually not attacking you. They're trying to strut and intimidate, but they're really not attacking. When somebody attacks, they're usually just going to go right to you, boom, and they're going to go. What we want to do with changing the dynamic of that attack is to take away the initial advantage that the attacker has. And here's a couple of things to think about. One is you can take away the advantage just simply by not getting attacked or surviving that initial attack. Most attacks are over and done in 7 seconds or even less. There's not a lot of time there, right? They're looking to get you on the ground quickly and subdue you immediately. It's not about grappling with them, right? They're looking to get over and done and to have maximum advantage of you. So you can change the dynamics of an attack in several different ways. One, you can do it physically, let's say blocking a strike, right? Or two, using your footwork to get out of a strike. You can put an object between you and the attacker so that the attacker can't advance without having to address this object. So think about it. If you get behind a couch, or you get on one side of a couch and the attacker's on another side, or kitchen table, or some obstacle that you use that changes the dynamic, that equalizes the situation, and it takes away their advantage. Now, the other thing that you can do in a situation like this is, again, I mentioned if you block a strike, then they have to kind of reprogram again and come back with a second strike. The other thing is if you then do a counter strike, even if it doesn't land, they still have to respond to it. In that instant when they have to respond to you, all of a sudden they've gone from the attacker to having to defend. Even if your strike doesn't land, that doesn't matter, right? They have to respond to it. In doing that, you've taken away their advantage, and that gives you a chance to survive this. One last thing I want to talk about really briefly is self-defense. Self-defense, it's given mythic proportions. We all remember Bruce Lee, and hey, Bruce Lee was amazing, right? But defense doesn't have to be to that level. As a matter of fact, defense is something that should be easy, it should be basic, and it should be something that anybody can do. Now, when I work with people, I teach what was taught to the men and women that were placed behind Nazi lines in World War II to work with the local resistance. And the reason that I like that approach to self-defense is because they had to learn something quickly that any of them could do. And let's face it, they couldn't carry their weapons. They might have gone behind enemy lines with their weapons, but their weapons are going to identify them as Allied forces. They usually had to cache their weapons. They couldn't keep them with them. They needed simple approaches to do that. Now, couple of things. What I like to talk about in terms of that is the very first thing is this is going to amp things up. This is going to calm things down, but you can block from it, you can strike from it, you can do all of the things that you need to do. You can even trap, whatever, but you have access to do it while protecting yourself. You see that? That's protecting yourself. This is encouraging. This says it's going to happen, bring it on. This says, oh, hey, calm down, but you're able to defend yourself. You're able to attack from it if you need to, so you have that ability. The next thing that I want you to understand is self-defense that requires constant training, years and years. And look, I did martial arts for 15 years. I taught it for 10 years. When an attack happens, you don't have time for something complicated. You have to be in for something simple. Now, the other thing, and this is seriously counterintuitive, and it's really scary when it happens, but you have to remember, distance from the attacker is not necessarily your friend. They could be armed with a firearm, in which case a bullet travels 1,500 feet a second. Distance is not your friend. They could have a knife and they can easily close, but here's the thing. A weapon that you can't in some way stop from being used against you is going to be used against you continuously until it succeeds. So you have to be able to immobilize that weapon. It's not necessarily the attacker, because it's almost two different things. But first and foremost, if somebody pulls a gun, you're not going to worry about the attacker kicking you, right? You got to worry about that gun. All your focus has to be on that gun. If he pulls a knife on you, again, you don't have to worry about him punching you. Yes, he could, but that's not why he pulled that knife, right? Your focus has to be on that knife. Now, when I talk about immobilizing the weapon, what I'm talking about is a process known as trapping, which is just a fancy way of saying grabbing. What if they pick up a chair and they want to swing that chair at you? That becomes a weapon. Now, it's an impact weapon, and sometimes you have to let the motion of an impact weapon actually do that and simply move it or steer it rather than try to grab it, right? You can try to grab the chair and then you have a wrestling match, and hey, at least you're changing the dynamic. But if the weight of the chair is such that as he swings it and it comes forward and you simply parry his hand, redirecting the chair, if it doesn't hit you, one, you survive, that's great. Two, his own momentum is going to create opportunity for you. So what we're looking to do when it comes to self-defense is not anything fancy, right? We want to respond to this specific situation. And the main thing, by the way, is to keep your head about you. We are programmed in fight or flight. We don't have to amp ourselves up. We don't have to psych ourselves up. We do that because we're programmed to when we realize we're facing a real threat. Now, maybe if you've tried stuff and they teach you to get all, angry and aggressive and all of that, that's great, but that's because you're training and your brain knows you're not in a threatening situation. When we face a real, genuine threat, we are programmed to respond to it. So cut all of that stuff out. Don't worry about the mental thing. The key thing here is to keep yourself calm enough to be able to respond, to breathe, right? When we breathe, we oxygenate the body, we oxygenate the brain. It allows the brain to properly function. That's the kind of stuff that we want to do. I don't want to go heavily into self-defense on this, but I wanted to talk really briefly about the 4 components of safety for when you work with what can turn into a violent situation. And sadly, these days, people are so aggrieved and everybody's so angry and politics is so divisive that people can just launch right from, they could be coming into your restaurant and they could be angry. They could be an unhappy customer. They could be an unhappy client. They could be the family, if you're a lawyer, they could be the family of your client or opposing counsel's client. There's just no way of knowing specifically where these threats can come from. So 1, begin by practicing your awareness of your environment. Look around you, say to yourself, describe to yourself what you're seeing. Just do it. Just practice it. 2, de-escalation. And by the way, this is a great place to be for de-escalation too, with your hands like this, because then there is a barrier if an attack is launched. But remember, it's not to go toe-to-toe. It's not to trade, snarky comments and hit back verbally. It's to calm, right? We want to keep that person from launching. 3rd, if you can't stop them from launching, you got to be prepared to change that dynamic. Take away their advantage. Do whatever you have to do to take away the advantage. Taking away the advantage will give you the opportunity to defend yourself. And I'm going to leave you with one thing on that self-defense. And the final component of this is, look, it's not that you need to subdue your attacker. You need to create an opportunity to get out of there safely. So when we're talking about self-defense, we're not talking about, you've got to use these techniques that are going to end it completely. You don't need to kill them unless you absolutely do need to kill them. But you need to create the opportunity to get out of there. Now, if you liked what you had in this video, I'm going to encourage you to go ahead and download my free situational awareness guide. It takes you through some different scenarios and how to use that situational awareness to keep yourself safe. You can find a link to it in the description below.